So good morning, thank you for having me here. I'm going to take us on, I think, a slightly different tack, beginning to tell some of the very early parts of a story of what we hope is an emerging paradigm for funding and commissioning. And what I'm referring to here is a piece of programme of work that was kicked off by the launch of this report. There are some copies at the back, looking at new approaches to funding and commissioning which are better suited to complexity. And ourselves at Collaborate, we support, through our consultancy, a lot of collaborative models of social change. A lot of that is place-based. And with our collaborators at Newcastle University Business School, we do a lot of work in supporting funders and commissioners in better ways of working. And we were interested in beginning to map out some different ways, some experimental practice that we were seeing emerging among some of those that we were working with. And so we started with asking the question, how is it that those with the resource decide the best use of, the best way to allocate what is available to them? And we spoke in depth to a small number of funders and commissioners to answer this question. And what we heard was, in the context of ongoing austerity, of rising demand and increasing complexity, a lot of those funders and commissioners were really pushing back against some of the more traditional prevailing models of funding and commissioning. So pushing against the view that the best way to achieve good outcomes and impact is by tightly measuring and managing the ways of working. And so in the public sector, these were people who were saying, we've had enough of new performance management. We've had enough of new performance management techniques and practices which are about delivering to KPIs and tight targets. In the philanthropic world, we were seeing people moving away from strategic forms of philanthropy and the ever-increasing focus on measuring impact. And instead, these funders and commissioners were beginning to experiment with much more iterative, very different ways of working, thinking about how to break down some of those silos, whether that was within the public sector, looking at health and social care integration and opportunities there, or indeed for some of the charitable funders we talked to, looking at emergent philanthropy and more iterative relational models of funding. And they were looking particularly at, how do you respond better to what we really understand to be complexity in three areas? So the complexity of people's lives, the issues they're dealing with, their needs, their aspirations, the complexity of the issues that we're all working around. So whether that's obesity and the multiple factors that underpin that, from media influences to our built environment to health to diet, to the third area of complexity, which is the systems and services of support that we all work around. And as infrastructure organisations, you know exactly what I mean by that, the complexity of the systems of support within which you're a crucial brokering part. And what we heard was something that we think is really encouraging. We heard three common themes emerging from this research. That the way that these people are funding is both, it's more human. And by that, I mean that these funders really value the people involved in the initiatives that they're funding. So that whether that is the people within the grant receiving organisation, whether that's the beneficiary, frontline worker, other commissioners in the system, they really value the personal relationships with those people. They believe, therefore, that those people are intrinsically motivated. They don't need to be extrinsically motivated. And therefore, trust becomes a really important working principle in this new paradigm, to be nurtured and really purposefully looked after. The second headline is that this way of working is much more systemic. It understands the interdependence of a range of different actors and bits of the system and support and services all working together. It's that system that produces the outcome. It's not any one single actor. And they therefore work across and within these systems and take responsibility for the health of the system as a whole, not just one bit of it, not just thinking about your direct relationship as grant giver to grantee. And they do that by building networks and funding, say, learning communities as a way of creating and holding that health of the system. Finally, this way of working seems to be much more adaptive. It holds that you can't attribute outcomes to single actors and therefore rejects all kinds of performance management, essentially. So older forms of accountability don't fit. Big question, how then do you hold accountability in the system? Attitudes to risk and failure look really different, and there's a real flexibility, therefore, in delivery. Instead, there's a belief that it's learning that drives improvement, not delivering to KPIs and the like. And so what we see are some common markers. What does this actually look like in practice? We're seeing more people using unrestricted and core funding to enable people to work in this much more flexible way. We're also seeing more long-term funding emerging. So we're in real recognition that this sort of way of working takes time. And that's where I'm going to have to stop. But all I am going to say is we have had a really good response to the work, lots of people wanting to get involved, and so we do have an open invite at the moment. We'll be forming a community of practice to take this work forward and experiment, and we will have some resource to offer to support partnerships in exploring this way of working. So I hope to speak to more of you about it. Thank you.